Well, good morning, Jim.
Hello, Henry.
How you doing?
All the better for being here with you. As always, I'm the luckiest guy on earth, and it seems to get better. So I don't think it's fair.
I don't think so either. And I think that's why we're having these discussions, because I think that it provides people with a route to feeling that way.
I honestly hope so. I'm really glad you said that, because that's the only reason we're doing this. If it helps people in any way to feel anything like this, we're gold.
Yeah. And I think it's a constantly iterative process.
Mm-hmm.
You have to stumble uphill in terms of, I was just quieting my mind earlier, and quieting being active, right? Because it's not just there's an on-off switch in my mind.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly just in awe of how slippery it is in terms of I'm distracted again and I didn't even realize it.
Second by second. That's the point. I'm so glad you brought this up. I know we're fouling up the podcast, but the point is, no matter how quiet and still you think you are, you can get more still. And the rep is keep coming back. But I don't need it. I'm still. I'm totally... Come back. And you're going to realize you're going to drop in even deeper. You had more tension in your body. You had more noise, and it became normalized, and you don't notice it. So the practice is what's saving us. If I had to be the guy who knows how to do this all the time, we'd all be in trouble. But I don't. I just have to fall back on the practice right now. Boom. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, it was a sneaky attempted segue because it feels as if that practice is a consistent failure. And that's what we're talking about today.
God, I love this. This is great.
Because I felt as if when getting still, I wasn't still, you know, and still, it changes definition every time I get to a different level is the wrong word, but it's a useful model.
Yes.
Every time I get to a different level of quietness within myself, it's actually, as you were saying, more of a realization of, wow, it's actually noisy here too. Just at a subtler and in a subtler place, whether it be tension in my body, it's like, wow, I didn't realize that part of my abdomen or behind my shoulders was actually holding so much tension.
Yes.
And to me, that's like a failure per se, because my goal is to get still and I get closer to stillness. But what I realize is that I'm actually more and more unstill at more and more subtle levels.
Yes.
So there was kind of a segue there and it wasn't too much of a distraction. But that's our topic for today. We're talking about failure. And I think to start us off, I'm curious to hear, what are the different ways that you understand failure?
Well, first, Henry, you just may have outdone yourself with this topic. You've outdone yourself because this just may be the single most important topic to clearly and carefully define, even before we get started. Because I'd like to suggest that how any of us define, how we frame failure over time is crucial to living what I would call a successful life. So let's start with the word, as we so often do, and try to get going in the right direction. So failure comes from the Latin, fallere, to deceive or disappoint, to be lacking or insufficient in some way, to fall short. And for me, that's already a little helpful because it begs the question, fall short of what? And if we dig, we're going to realize that at some level, failure is falling short of some kind of expectation. And I'd like to suggest, if you expect something to happen and it ultimately doesn't happen, that was a false expectation. So how do we frame failure over time? That's the key. So at any point in time, knowing only what we currently know at the time, we may set a goal, an intention, an expectation for the future. Now, try to remember, that's not the future, it's a future we're creating in our minds. Okay? A best guess. It's about as good as it gets. Then, over time, everything changes, as it always does. Circumstances evolve. Our knowledge, our understanding expands, and yet, very often, our goals, our intentions, our expectations remain fixed, frozen in the past. At what point do we just decide, collectively or individually, to excise, to cut out a series of events from the ongoing continuity of time and arbitrarily label them success or failure? I'd like to suggest that it's not just you here. It's not just me here. It's not just any of us here, separate and alone. We are a part of, not apart from, something much bigger. Something infinitely more complex than we can possibly understand at any given time. We are a part of an infinite universe that's busy doing what it's doing, and we have very little control over that. Remember from our Control podcast? So we're either cooperating with that universe, working with it, adapting to it, and adjusting our attitude, our will, our intention accordingly, or we're competing with the universe. We're fighting it. Like, this is what I want, and the hell with what the universe wants. Best of luck with that. Or we're trying to ignore the rest of the universe and imagine that we have much more control than we really do. So to kind of put this into context, keep things light, let me ask you a question. Are you a failure because you are not what you wanted to grow up to be in kindergarten?
No.
Do you even, why is that even funny? Do you even remember what you wanted to grow up to be when you were in kindergarten?
Not really.
Isn't that interesting? And yet, given the time of you were in kindergarten, that was crucial. So strictly speaking, from that point in time, you're a failure. Because I promise you, you're not a fireman or an astronaut. And thank God. So at what point does failure to achieve what may be a misguided, certainly ill-informed, ill-conceived goal, intention, expectation, become an ironic, if unintentional, success? So I'd like to suggest that that is a question of over time, over the long haul. So what we're talking about here is the fact that at any given time, the best we can say about any goal, any intention, any expectation is it seemed like a good idea at the time. Now, to be very clear, I'm not suggesting you shouldn't do your best to accomplish your goals. You absolutely should. I do my best every time I go out. Every time I set a goal, I do my best. But here's the thing. If you've actually done your best, you've given it everything you've got, then let go and actually learn what the rest of the universe has to teach you. Try not to let these arbitrary and very myopic labels, success and failure, inhibit your potential ultimate success. So I'd like to suggest that failure is a highly relative, a highly subjective way to edit, to simplify, and to categorize otherwise overwhelmingly complex situations, events, phenomena that we have surprisingly little control over. And that label is useful. It's even necessary up to a point. As long as we remember what it is, it's a label. It's a symbol. It's a representation of something vastly bigger and more complex than we can possibly fully understand at any given point in time. Does that help kind of set this thing up?
I hope so. I'm going to regurgitate what I caught.
Absolutely.
as per usual, just to make sure that
somebody's got to make some sense out of it.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm going to make sense out of it. Mm-hmm. Maybe me, where I fall short, where I fail to gather some things might actually be illuminatory. That's not a word. Might actually illuminate where you can help sort of build up my understanding.
Sure.
Okay. So we started off with you talking about how failure is really the frame over time in which you are seeing things and how you are deeming whether you are living a successful life or not as the alternative. You defined it as, well, you went back to the Latin, and that is taken from the roots...
Fallere.
Fallere, was that right?
Yeah.
How do you spell it?
Fallere.
Gotcha, cool. And that's to deceive, to disappoint, to fall short. And your key question was fall short of what?
Yeah.
Right? And then you sort of took a step back and said, like, well, it comes into our expectation setting and our goal setting, which is subjective. We do it at a certain point of time. We freeze this frame in history, and then we sort of continue to relate to that while forgetting that we are opposing a nonlinear dynamic universe that's going to do whatever it wants, whether we want to acknowledge that or not.
Yeah.
And at what point do we look at the frame and update the frame and say, okay, now I've got more information. Let's shift the goals or adapt what it is to be a better fit to what I know what's going on now. Mm-hmm. I've got more recent, more relevant information now, so I can potentially create a much better idea of how I frame my success or failure. Mm-hmm. And you use sort of an extreme example, which is very helpful to highlight this, where it's like your aspirations in kindergarten are no longer that important, or hopefully not, because you've grown up and you've gotten a lot of information since. Yes. And so updating that sort of expectation, that goal, that model is key to really, I think, tapering states of mind so that you don't get into a knot where you're thinking, I'm a failure because I didn't meet a goal or an expectation. Yeah. It's more so, how can I reconceive this goal and relabel what I define as successful to continue to move forwards in good stride?
Yes.
And it seems as if there's, and forgive me if I've gotten the wrong definition here, but is that causal meaning, where it's like I'm attributing meaning to a label, and that label has caused, like it's a cause, for example, let's use astronaut, right? There's meaning that comes with that has societal status.
Yeah.
And the example that you used in our very first podcast was like, I hear thunder, therefore I expect a storm. And it's like, I see an astronaut, therefore I expect X, Y, and Z to come with it. And that label has sort of meaning attached to it.
Yes.
I just thought that as you were talking, but I didn't quite have confidence as to whether that was actually causal meaning and whether that was actually playing a part in what you were saying.
Well, I think you're right. And what I'm suggesting is how you frame an astronaut. And we have to frame things. I'm not knocking the fact that we frame things. I'm asking us to be very careful to remember we are taking a chunk out of something that's infinitely complex and saying that's what it is. We have to represent something that we can't even fully perceive. So be very careful if, and we'll get into this more, be very careful if assigning failure to a series of events that didn't turn out the way you obviously, falsely expected them to, that it stops you from continuing to learn and grow. That's the key here. Because it's very easy to just stop. Very easy to just declare this a failure, and I'm not going to get any more out of it.
Let's take a time out for the
Good.
car outside, because that was quite loud. Also, it gave me a chance to maybe give you a simpler question, because I don't think my question was very coherent with the causal meaning aspect.
Good. And the Air Force.
Yeah, we got a second. I'm in no rush. Okay, so it really seems from what you were saying is that there's this mechanism of labeling things as success or failure, which might be ill-suited to, it might just not be a good activity to be doing if you have information that's coming in that says, actually, we can adjust this frame for a better use.
Yes.
And so my thought here is that, like, a lot of this feels like it comes from the similar energetic place, where when I think of failure, I think of like mistakes and getting things wrong. And so it seems as if, okay, we have this expectation of what we want something to be. We put a label on it, and that might fall short of what that expectation is.
Right.
We mistook what that could be.
Yeah.
So I think my question here is, what is a mistake? And it's sort of lumped in where it's, why do we try and hide mistakes? And why, it's similar to failure. Like, why are we so averse to failure as well, if
Sure.
that makes sense?
Makes perfect sense. And again, your questions are crucial because the correlation, the relationships, the integral relationship between mistakes and failure, very important here. First, a mistake. Two is a label. We label something a mistake. Okay? And I'd like to suggest that you're getting to the nuts and bolts of the thing, because mistakes, at least from my perspective, are the fundamental building blocks to either success or failure, depending utterly on how you frame them. So let's go to that word too, because you just hit on that as you were pronouncing this word mistake. Literally, to mistake, to take wrongly, okay? To interpret, to judge incorrectly, right? A fault in understanding or perception. And I'd like to suggest that a mistake remains incomplete, that is, incorrectly interpreted or judged, unless and until we learn from it. Because at this deeper level, a mistake is what I call embodied learning. The only real learning there is that isn't an abstraction in the mind. It's felt deeply. And that embodied learning is risky. There's no question about it. From an evolutionary standpoint, very risky to make mistakes. I'd like to suggest that for the most part, it is well worth the risk making a certain kind of mistake, and that is a mistake after having done your best. And by best, I mean deciding what it is you want to do in the first place, then throwing everything you've got at it. And we'll explore how much more broad that is than people might think. Okay? Once you've done this thing, once you've learned from a mistake, I'd like to suggest that it suddenly, almost magically, transforms into tuition, the cost of real knowledge. And that's something that is so rarely explored or given value to because we're so busy focusing on this arbitrary and absolute label. I once had a client, a commercial airline pilot, one of the first female commercial airline pilots, remarkable woman. She actually helped break down that barrier. Incredible woman, one of the sharpest people I've ever met. And she brilliantly explained in a way that even I could understand how a modern jetliner can fly from LA to Chicago on automatic pilot by never being on course, ever. Now, with apologies to all the aeronautical engineers out there, all you avionics experts, this is a simplification. But she explained that they program in a hypothetical ideal course into the software of the automatic pilot. Hypothetical ideal course. Then they take off manually. Then they throw it over to automatic pilot. And that plane then starts being too far to the left and correcting, too far to the right and correcting, too high and correcting, too low and correcting. It is constantly making and correcting mistakes until it lands in Chicago. And somehow that just made me feel a whole lot better about being human. Because that's what life is. Without those mistakes, that plane wouldn't be able to fly, at least not on automatic pilot. And there are so many examples of mistakes, large and small, that have changed the world for the better. If we have time later, I'd love to share some because they're great. Some of them are huge, some of them are so silly and tiny, but they're fun.
Can we do that now?
Sure. So let me think. I guess one of the bigger ones is the latter part of the 15th century. This young Italian adventurer, explorer named Christopher Columbus, based on modern science of the day, gets this wacky idea. We could find we could discover a new and better, easier, less dangerous, and faster trade route to the Far East, India, what they call the East Indies. Okay? Because right now, everyone in Europe is going overland to trade for silks and porcelain and spices and tea. This stuff is really valuable, especially in upper class. So Columbus is taking this idea that the world is round, and contrary to popular belief, no well-educated person of that era thought the world was flat. Okay? They knew it was round. The question is, how big around? So Columbus gets this idea, and he's got his own calculations. He thinks that around 2,400 nautical miles due west, not east, due west, we're going to hit the East Indies. So he pitches the idea in his native Italy. They want nothing to do with it. Okay, failure. Goes to the next European country, Portugal. Ever hear about this? No, me neither. He goes to the King of Portugal, King John II of Portugal. Well, John's experts say, don't invest a dime in this. This guy's nuts. He's got it so far off. His calculations are like 75% off. It's more like 10,000 nautical miles to get to India, the East Indies, what they called them. Okay? Don't do it. This guy's going to get a quarter of the way, and he's going to run out of water and food. They're going to die in the middle of the ocean. Don't do it. So King of Portugal said, nope. Okay, failure number 2. So he goes to Spain, next country on his list. And he pitches the idea to King Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. Their experts say the same thing. This guy's way off. It's like 9,600 nautical miles to get to where we believe India is. He's saying 2,000. They're going to die. And these are little ships, by the way. They're not big ocean liners. They're the size of a small tennis court. And he had 3 of them that he was pitching. But in what I'd like to suggest is the first recorded case of FOMO, the king and queen of Spain don't want Columbus to go to some other country in case he's successful, so they go ahead and take a shot. They go for it. They give him his money. They give him his ships. Yep. They're all loaded up. They're going to go find a new trade route to India. Here we go. So, due west. They're aiming for 2,400 miles. At 2,800 miles, he makes landfall. I was right. You SOBs don't know what you're talking about. I was right. There it is. There's India. There are the East Indies. And these local people, from now on, they're Indians. Okay? So, we did it. We made it. He comes back. And it wasn't for another 10 years that they realized he was totally off. If the continent of North America hadn't been there, he would have in fact died, and all his men. But he discovered not a new trade route to India. He discovered something more valuable, a whole new world. And at least in Western Europe, the rest is history. Now, you can pick at what he did and how he did it or anything else, but that's a case of a huge mistake. Not one, but several, adding up to something really valuable because the universe has something else going. There's another one. Centuries later, there's a Scottish chemist named Alexander Fleming. And this guy is working to try to figure out how they can do something about these pathological bacteria, especially Staphylococcus, You know, when they say staph infection, that's what that's referring to. Deadly bacteria. There is nothing they can do if these things take off in your body. People are dying like crazy. So he's got several cultures going, these little experiments in these little, what they call petri dishes, glass dishes, where he's culturing, he's raising cultures of these things. And he's working on it, but he's not getting anywhere. And I guess he got tired of pushing so hard. He decides, I'm going to take a holiday. I'm going on vacation. So he goes on vacation without properly sort of taking care of these cultures of these bacteria. When he comes back from his happening vacation, there's mold all over everything. It's like, oh, mistake. Fortunately, before he just dumps everything in the sink and covers it in bleach, he notices that everywhere this mold is growing, this deadly bacteria is itself dead. He didn't know it, but he had just discovered penicillin. And the modern age of antibiotics, that discovery and every subsequent discovery along the way saved, in the end, millions of lives. So much so that we don't even realize how precious these antibiotics are. And then just one more, which I just think is fun. Like decades later, it's 1968, another chemist named Spencer Silver. He's working for the 3M company in Minnesota. And he is working on an industrial adhesive. So get this, industrial adhesive. This stuff is
Sticky.
Boku sticky, right? I was going to say sticky as, and then I realized, okay, I'm not going to do that. But that's his job. So he's working, remember he's a chemist. His little formula that he's working on creates this new, amazing adhesive. It's not very sticky, not at all, and the damn stuff doesn't fully dry. But this is a corporation, so he's got to go before his superiors and give a report. So he goes up and kind of puts the best face on it. He says, well, I've come up with this adhesive. It's not very sticky, and it kind of doesn't dry. It stays tacky. And needless to say, they hate it. They call it odd and useless. I love those two terms. Send him back to his little lab with his tail between his legs and, get it right. We're looking for, this is what we're looking for. Fortunately, Spencer Silver has this friend, Art Fry, who is the choir master of his local church choir. He knows that his friend Spencer is kind of an inventive guy, so he comes to him with a problem. Spence, dude, I've got this situation. I need bookmarks for my hymnal, the big thick book with all the hymns in it. The problem is every bookmark that I put into this thing, the minute I tip the hymnal up in the stand, the way it needs to be to conduct, the bookmarks fall out. And I got to be able to move these things around because we're going from hymn to hymn to hymn. Can you come up with something? And fortunately, Spencer wasn't suicidal after screwing up his adhesive. And he thought, I wonder if I put just a little smudge of this adhesive on a piece of paper, and you could sort of stick it on here, but it wouldn't ruin the paper. It stays tacky. You could use it again. It was a total success. Art Fry was thrilled. And what Spencer Silver didn't realize was he had just invented the Post-it note. This odd, useless, sticky, but not very sticky, but tacky adhesive turned into the single best-selling office supply product in history. It made the 3M company hundreds of millions of dollars. Mistake, big mistake. But none of these people allowed the mistake to just stop them, to crush them. They learned from their mistakes. That's the thing. I'm not saying go out trying to make mistakes, but you're going to make mistakes. The universe was talking to these people, and they capitalized on what appeared to be an absolute, which is this label, mistake. Yeah, up to a point. Does that make sense, or does that just confuse things for you?
It doesn't confuse things at all. I love story time.
Okay.
And I also think it's really cool to basically shift the model in my mind about constantly updating the models in my mind to better fit the information that's coming in and keep open solutions that could be potentially helpful. Because from all three of those, if you don't have an open mind, it's like, well, I'm just going to tuck my tail between my legs and sort of hang my head because I'm a failure.
Yeah.
However, when getting all of the new information where it's like, oh, maybe this isn't the East Indies.
That's right.
Or it's like, maybe this adhesive could be used for some other purpose.
Yes.
Then all of a sudden it is more liberating because there is opportunity and updated knowledge to be able to sort of tackle any type of circumstance or problem that you may face.
And ultimate success. Ultimate. But it's how you frame it. That's all. What ultimately is more useful to you in terms of your life?
And I think that it's such a shame because you see this not working with a model that should be really promoting this because of its purity. And we've talked about the scientific method to start with. And
That's what it is.
Well, we've talked about it a lot, actually, throughout these podcasts in terms of posing a hypothesis, collecting information, and then trying to remain as neutral as possible to the information coming in.
Yes.
And then seeing if your hypothesis testing was valid or not.
Yes.
The problem is that with so much of science is that's not lucrative if you're constantly giving null results.
Right.
If you're not giving results that have the conclusions, and so you warp the incentives for people to manipulate.
Brilliant.
To manipulate the numerology, to manipulate the results, to either only because you get on this like publishing treadmill where it's like gotta publish, and so it takes the purity and the intent away from actual mistake making, and nobody's all that interested in what doesn't work.
Right.
However, if there was better documentation, more accurate documentation, and a more thorough study of what doesn't work, people would then be able to not have to make so many of the same mistakes as others, be able to learn more quickly, and not have this sort of like, I don't know, there's a fancier term for this, but like a glorification bias, where it's like, oh, I'm only going to read the stuff that's come through that has worked, that was a success. Right. Although in order to be a success, there might have been a lot of biases that had to get pumped into it. That's because every single person's trying to keep afloat and alive in this world, I guess. So I thought that was quite interesting because there was that glunk for me where it's like, okay, I'm constantly, it was a lot of freedom to be bold, to adapt my models of whatever is working and whatever isn't working around me, and to shift that frame and to reframe, because within that comes optimism, within that comes curiosity, because to me curiosity and learning are two sides of the same coin. And that provides a lot of internal emotional freedom. On the other side of this, the label of failure can hurt emotionally. How can that signal be helpful? And do you think it is good to try and mitigate that signal? Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, because failure hurts. And I like to suggest that there's a reason why failure hurts. There's a reason we try to hide our mistakes, as you were pointing out earlier. From an evolutionary standpoint, mistakes are very risky. So we're not on the first level going to glorify people who say this is where the water is and there's no water there, and all our people die of thirst. So we've gradually learned that mistakes are highly risky. The question that we only get through evolution, that is to keep evolving, is, are some of these mistakes worth the risk? Because it's just an absolute frozen in time label to say all mistakes aren't worth the risk. Don't make any mistakes. Mistakes are embodied learning if you in fact learn from them. We're wired to learn from mistakes. We call it trial and error. And that's the beginning of that scientific principle. Trial and error. I'm just saying that's incomplete description of the process. Trial, error, correct, and retry in a different way based on the mistake. That's life. That's how we learn. That's how we live. Life isn't some predetermined agenda on yours or my calendar that has to happen by 30:15. So failure hurts in addition to that, because when we make a mistake, our cultures have come to value knowing the correct answer, knowing and being able to do the thing. We have unfortunately heaped status on people who are correct, and we withdraw or withhold status from people who are, my choice of words, in the process of learning. We don't value learning as much as we value already knowing. Well, how do you come to already know? Because I'm suggesting the minute you say, I already know, you've stopped learning. And we learn best by this embodied learning process. Mistakes, failure hurts because, remember from our identity podcast, it is such a slippery slope from I failed to I am a failure. And once I identify myself as a failure, that is such a crucial, just destructive blow to my sense of self-worth. I need a sense of self-worth to accomplish anything. And what I'm suggesting is you can grow even from failure in that, okay, what is it that's really getting a punch to the gut? It's my egoic idea of who I am. It's my pride. Okay, swallow your pride and have the guts to learn what this universe is teaching you. Because you have the guts to get out and try something. And unfortunately, our cultures, and ours is really like this, giving kudos and status to people who appear to already know, even the ones who don't know, over people who are openly learning by making mistakes and admitting to them. So does that help get at why it hurts to make a mistake, or why it hurts to fail?
And where I sort of want to take this is that from a tribal aspect, it makes sense that we have these heuristics, these shortcuts within our minds to label people as successful or as failures based on really luck and circumstance falling in their favor in certain ways and the ability to persist. Because I think that one thing, having lived in the world of entrepreneurship for the past 6 years, is that persistence is the key. It's you described an iterative feedback loop where it was trial, error, update, trial, error, update, trial, error, update, and continue to move forwards.
Yes.
Because then you get the repetitions on goal per se, and more chance of some like absolute divine set of circumstances falling in your favor. For example, it's like, oh my God, this isn't East India, this is a whole different continent.
Yes.
That's incredible. But like you have to get those repetitions in to start with, and you have to have like to quote Carol Dweck, you have to have that growth mindset where it's not fixed in any position. It's continuing to update the model of self within self.
Point.
And I think that the real key point here is that, as a society, we will heap status onto people that we deem to be successful.
Yes.
And then you sort of speak to them, and what becomes very clear is that you can feel the people that have learned and the people that have done it the hard way and the people that got lucky on the first try.
Yes.
And there's a massive difference there.
Yeah.
But like you don't necessarily see it from the highlight reels of social media or from the snippets that you get, whether it be a news article or whatever, but you can feel it in person. Right. And that's something that I think is really awesome because, I've felt it with you, whereas I feel as if you're one of the most grounded, if not the most grounded and internally successful people I've ever met. And it's from a feeling perspective where I know I could put you in a room with anybody famous or anybody with all of these accolades. And there's a sense of authenticity. If Obama comes up to you and says, hey, you suck, I don't think you would take really much offense to it because it's like, cool, great, whatever.
Tell me how.
Yeah, exactly.
Help me out.
So I think that it's just always fun when you take it to the evolutionary perspective because it starts to click in more of a meta view of, oh my God, I forgot that I'm just witnessing a hairy monkey again. Yeah. I woke up into this hairy monkey suit and I'm going to play that story. It makes so much sense as to, I may be feeling myself as a failure because I am creating a model of somebody else in my mind and I'm deeming that as success and not taking into account all of these other factors that come into it, because we do live in a nonlinear, dynamic, chaotic system that is inherently unpredictable. And it's like, well, it worked for that situation, for that person, but what am I measuring that by? And how am I measuring my own self-worth? Because if I go out and then I try and do something similar and I get through, 9 or 10 failures and then think to myself, oh my God, because there's this trend of failure here, I'm going to actually lump that onto describing myself as a failure.
I am a failure.
And then getting into a pit of depression. Because,
So why try?
That's
right.
Why even get off of the couch type
Brilliant.
deal? And that sort of story that you could be telling yourself is, as you mentioned, a very slippery slope, because instead of identifying with a particular process, which is an iterative process of trying and trying and trying and trying and trying, you actually like try a few times, then step back and create a different label for yourself that is inherently misfit, because we don't live in a dangerous environment where these instincts were created. Mistakes can be absolutely made here. It's not like there's a very low chance of dying based on
very few mistakes. There are exceptions, but very few mistakes are actually fatal. And to quote Nietzsche, that which doesn't kill you makes you smarter, makes you wiser if you learn. And you've done such a great job of pointing out what happens when we prematurely label something or someone a failure. Let's go to the other extreme. What happens when you prematurely label someone a success? Because there is so much circumstantial dumb luck this chaotic, crazy, randomish thing that is the universe. No one feels comfortable with that, so la, 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 la. Okay, but that's what's there. So you label somebody a success because they happen to hit it at that time, at that place. Let's just go to circumstantial, fortunate entrepreneurs. They make it, then they have their happening exit where they sell the company to somebody else before it tanks. Okay, now what? I wish that I had $10 for every person that I've met who's in that situation, and they have not been able to do anything else. They're labeled a success, and they've developed such an aversion to failure that they won't take the risk that got them their initial success in the first place.
I think such a good example here to use as an analogy is if you look at the story of the Beatles, they spent, what was it, like 7 years in Hamburg and different areas in Germany, like getting the rhythm.
Scrubbing.
Yeah. And getting all of the really building the relationship to failure that gave them the strength and the courage to actually experiment incredibly well in different scenarios. And then you contrast that to a one-hit wonder that gets top of the charts and then is looking around like, how do I do it again? But doesn't have the chutzpah, doesn't have the gonads to be like, oh, this is how. And if it doesn't work, let's just keep going.
Yeah.
Because who cares? Let's not give too much of a impetus to the audience and to the labels that may be put upon me.
Yes.
I have so much of an internal reserve that I know how to label myself.
Mm-hmm. And that's the key. How am I framing it internally? It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Okay. So how do you then define success?
Well, that gets tricky because you're asking how I define success, so be careful.
That's not tricky. I want to know that answer.
Well, okay. So, number one, success also is a label. I'd like to suggest that success is the flip side of that other label, failure. They are traditionally viewed in the absolute. And I would suggest that's a fatal mistake because it stops the process. I think success and failure are equal imposters. I very rarely use those terms in my life. I really do. I rarely use them. I use them sparingly. But for me, success is a combination of have I or has anyone else done their absolute best? And only that person can determine that. Because I'd like to suggest that part of the sting of most failure is that nagging sense that I really didn't do my best. So you want to get rid of that part of failure, do your absolute best. Then have a balance between outcome orientation, especially what I'm calling outcome-only orientation. Our culture is almost exclusively outcome-oriented, and process orientation. That is, what happens along the way? What do I get that's beneficial along the way? What's the process? A balance of those two things is crucial. I'm not suggesting outcomes aren't important. They are. They're just not everything. So a balance between outcome orientation and process orientation.
Do you mind just pausing for a second,
Sure.
please, Jim?
Yeah, exactly.
He's right there. I know it's about to rev up. I can hear
He
it.
turned it off.
You think? Okay. Cool. Can you just rewind a little bit and start with the balance between outcome and process
Sure.
orientation?
So this balance, having done your absolute best, balance between outcome orientation, or worse, outcome only orientation. That's the only thing that matters. The goal. It's the only thing that matters, the outcome. And process orientation. What is happening along the way? What are we getting along the way? It's a balance between the two. And whoever it was that first said that life is a journey, not a destination, as much as you want to just stick your finger down your throat, it's true. It's absolutely true. Because if you will just carefully look back on all the outcomes in history, a lot of these outcomes just fall away. It's the process of getting there that counts. It's what do you get as you're trying to achieve a goal, an outcome. So for me, that really helps to first set a much more adaptable frame for success so that you have a chance of working with this, as you say, very, very chaotic, very non-linear universe that we're living in. It doesn't operate A to B to C to D to E, no matter how much we prefer that. So this idea of random stuff happening has to be factored into it somehow.
So I love that, by the way, and I love the balance of outcome orientation to process orientation, because I skew more towards process, and I think that's because, I mean, there's a real applicable example to use here. You know, with the journey of still life thus far, I've been very process oriented as we've had to pivot through many different circumstances.
Yes.
For example, signing a 5-year lease on the space and then COVID happening 3
Yes.
weeks afterwards.
Sure.
Pivoting into technology.
Yeah.
And not getting the outcomes instantaneously that we wanted. I then doubled down on process and like continued to do my best, knowing that that was the only thing that was within my control.
Will you stop right there? I hate to cut you off, but I want you to hear what you just said. Because of these things that were beyond your control, you were outcome oriented. You learned from, let's just call it failure, even though I despise using the term in this case. You then doubled down and became more process-oriented. Brilliant move. I have to call the whole thing a success. I'm sorry.
Well, there's even more to learn from that,
Yes.
because without momentum, you know, you can't steer a parked car.
Right.
I've gotten really good at steering parked cars. You know, without momentum, there's not this balance of feedback from the external universe, and to really lean more into outcome orientation. And we started to get that when, you know, we launched the app 2 years later, brought the engineering in-house, and then we started to feel the momentum when we could start doing our in-person events again in the space, in the studio.
Right.
And that was like, oh, now we're getting some outcome. It's not all just process. There's a difference, a shift of sort of energy at that point.
Yes.
And then really pushing on that front. And, you know, we surrendered the space 9 months ago, said goodbye to that, because it was like looking at just the numbers, which you kind of have to do when running a business. You know, this isn't a charity.
Right.
And it just didn't make any sense to continue to try and really support a model that wasn't going to give us, like, you're in your 70s, Jim. It's like, as much as doing your best is awesome, it's like we nearly killed you twice, and there was only an increase of pace to be able to support the model that we were trying to push up.
And just to be clear, that's not a figure of speech. I was on my way to dying
twice.
Okay.
Well, there are probably more times that I didn't see, but there were 2 real close times where it's like seeing you with the shingles.
Yes,
that was fucked, and then witnessing the rehearsing for the programs, all of these 6-month programs that you sort of, not all of these 6-month programs. Let me break that up for a second.
Sure,
for people that don't have any sort of knowledge about this, we asked Jim to try and replicate his private practice by pulling together a series of workshops. And each one of these workshops, we're just kind of like pulling numbers out of thin air. It's like, oh, let's just make them 4 hours long and put them sort of every other month, but we'll fill them with cohorts of people. So really, like, we'll have 4 cohorts going. So there's only like a 2-week turnaround time between these 4-hour long courses. And Jim, in order to do his best, committed them to memory, which meant that, being the only guy on stage with any lines has 24 hours worth of material to have in memory, so that he could energetically be there with the people in the room. And, I got to witness that because, having done my best in other circumstances, I was the only one that knew how to work all of the stuff in the space in terms of
thank God you were there,
pulling all of the audio equipment and the lighting and the projection rig and all of that stuff.
Right.
So we had a hell of a time for 9 months leading up to it, rehearsing 3 times a week. And those are 8-hour days while trying to run a production to run a software company and also recruiting for this program. So it was like, it was pretty crazy. And, there were a couple of moments during that of looking at you and I'm like, let's hope he makes it out. So just to give a little bit more context to like Jim almost dying twice, it's like, that's sure. It might have been more, but anyway, to now pick back up on the thread that I was talking about, it's like we get to sort of July last year, and it's like we shouldn't keep the space. That's not gonna support. It's not sustainable.
It's not big enough to hold the people we need.
And so at that point, it was like, okay, let's not try and raise money and force something that isn't after 5 years. If it isn't a hell yes, then it's like, maybe we shouldn't try and like really pump this in this direction. Maybe we should learn from the feedback that's coming back.
Yes.
Hence this podcast as a spin-off of that. However, what I was getting to there is like, there were moments where I felt like a failure. And there have been moments because it's like, we'll finish up this podcast, but it's like, do we want to get back on the hamster wheel of raising money and trying to start a business around something that might not be a business? You said that from before we even began. And I think that there have been moments where I've felt to myself, I am a failure. And what's been so beautiful about this practice and what's been so beautiful about watching your philosophy in action, it's like having done my best and pairing that with maintaining impeccable integrity around a creed that I hold within myself. In terms of like a rule set of ways that I want to behave so that I can really embody the person it is that I say that I am.
And you have.
And that has led me to, 3 weeks ago, I had a moment where I was sitting in bed on a Sunday night and just had this, oh my God, you've sacrificed so many aspects of your life for the past 6 years. And I closed my eyes and bubbled up was just, you're a lonely failure. Like that's all you got to show for this is you're a lonely failure. However, I thank God for you and for these experiences because for the first, what felt like the first time in my life, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to repress this. I'm going to lean into absolutely feeling this as fully and vividly as possible from this stance of, I'm not Henry Mitchell, I am aware of Henry Mitchell.
Good.
Now, what does being aware of a lonely failure feel like? And instead of having any of this aversion, any of this fear, any of this like sort of shyness, it's like, no, lean into it as fully as I can, and really just from a place of curiosity, feel what the feeling feels like, and not try and change it, and not try and move it in any way, but just literally ask it like, what am I learning? What are you trying to show me? And how can I help? And having that as a reflex meant that the next morning when I woke up, I did the exact same thing because the feeling was still there. And then a couple of hours later, I feel great. And it's like, I don't feel as if that's something that I'm going to have to, try and work through with you in 10 years.
Right.
And be like, Jim, why do I feel? It's like, no, I feel like that energetically was allowed to come and pass. And it came with it, like it brought with it a lot of these old beliefs about myself in prior situations and old labels and all of this stuff. And so this is just a long-winded way of saying, like, I can't thank you enough for your example, because I know what you mean by like riding the edge of doing your best and doing your best both in the process of something that you're building, but also doing your best to support and love the people that you're building with.
There you go.
That to me was a really key piece that I'm extraordinarily proud of.
Yes.
In terms of my own conduct, it's like doing my best there meant that I had the strength and the resilience and the reserve to be like, no, I want to feel really deeply what it is to be a lonely failure, and to like let that wash over me and not stick in any type of self-belief or label or anything like that. So much so that like I have no aversion to talking directly to anybody about that. There is no shame. There is no guilt. There is no fear. There's nothing. Long-winded way of saying thank you, you legend. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you, because I'm not sure that you're yet clear on what the hell you just did. Because it wasn't that long ago in one of our podcasts where you were literally asking, almost rhetorically, does this dependency, and I'm using the word dependency to save time, this dependency on status, this need to compare myself favorably and get credit from, get status from other groups, especially my male peers, ever end? You were despondent. It was hard for me not to just jump in and say what I'm going to say now. You have to find it, and you did. I like to suggest that what that means is you went inside by doing your best, even when you couldn't see where your next step came from, and you have shifted your values. A value that I assume would have lasted till you're 70. Status, status, status. You literally shifted that value because you went internally, and now there's something more important than status. I'm not saying status isn't important. It's going to continue to be important to you. Let's not kid ourselves. Now there's something much more important, and you're living it. You, a lonely failure, as labeled temporarily, are, forgive me, because I don't like doing this with language, a fucking success. Because you are free from something that's been dragging you down like a millstone around your neck in the middle of the ocean. You keep this up. You are making me so proud and making the world a better place. That is ultimate success by understanding the temporary framing of failure is just that. It's, as you say, a heuristic. It's a way to simplify, to edit, to categorize something that otherwise would just overwhelm us with its complexity. Useful as long as we remember what it is, and you just did. That is a piece of internal work that has taken a big old samskara, as they call it, and let it come up and out. That takes a hero's courage. I hope you don't think I'm kidding or just fluffing you up. That's hero's work, because you buried yourself in this and you said, I'm going to do my best no matter what. Congratulations. It's paying off big time. I can't tell you how much I admire and respect that. That's one of the many reasons I love you. You're willing to do the work. It's not just talk. How many times did you fail to step over the status roadblock? How many times?
Countless.
The only thing that matters is this time. Are you going to do it again? And you didn't. You went a different direction. I'm suggesting that what you are going to present to the world from now on is infinitely more important than any kind of arbitrary success doing something that would have kept you hunting for status. You cannot be motivated by status alone. You can't be authentic. Did you get the magic of this moment right here?
Yeah.
That's why I'm glad we're doing this. So it's not just you and me thinking tomorrow afternoon, what was it that happened? I can't remember. Because we're lost in some other moment, some other drama. Way to go. I got chills thinking about this. Because this is this program in action. This is you living it. That's why this isn't some hugely popular social media phenomenon. How many people are willing to do that? Well, I'm suggesting anyone who is going to have an enormously successful and liberated life. We'll see if anybody picks up, but they've got a living example right here.
We've got two.
Well, I don't know. I'm doing the best I can.
Well, thank you for all of that, Jim. I really do mean that, because having somebody to help me redefine my model of what success looks like to me was so important. I needed you. Otherwise, I would never have been able to get to the conclusions that I have in terms of being able to clear that hurdle of status and actually come from a far more essential aspect of myself.
Yeah.
And that has provided an incredible amount of liberation. And it's all spiritual work, in the sense where listening to my essence and really being true and pure to myself and making those decisions and doing my best at every single one of those points created a sense of completeness. And even when looking at failure, to a point that you were making before, the label of failure, but to another point that you're making before, it's like looking at that and reframing how I derive so much, and then being able to actually reap, like, holy shit, over the past 6 years, how much has been learned, how much is known now, that is nobody can take away, that there is real tuition, and the benefits are huge, if it's seen in that right mindset. So I just want to thank you all for this, because, it was really witnessing you during those rehearsals for our first program that made it really clear to me what doing your best actually is. because a lot of people say like, oh yeah, I did my best. And it's like, really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
And they know it. And you know it. Everybody knows it.
Yes.
It's an energetic feeling sense. You can feel that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's a long-winded way of reflecting this right back to you, because if it weren't for all of those experiences that we shared, there's no way I would have been able to even be aware of this until I was 70. You know,
Sure.
I wouldn't have had that privilege.
Sure.
And it really is a privilege to work with you and to watch what that really is in action.
Well, right back at you. And I mean that. I really do. Because you're now sharing it with other people. That's all we can do. You're not trying to sell it. There won't be that many people who are willing to do what you did. That's okay. If there's 10, I'm happy. That's why I have a one-on-one practice. Everyone who comes in wants it. Here it is. Let's do it. That means every time they come in, that's the first time I've ever met them. It's a brand new person, and they know that. There's no label of success or failure. Our job, keep digging to find that essential who you really are. And you just dug in, and it's way below a cinder block called status. It's way below that. And it resides there and has been there the whole time, waiting to kick that off.
And it's so much deeper than the monkey games, because status to me is very much a monkey game.
It is.
But when talking about connecting to that essential aspect, that spirit, I know that this is, again, a model, but helpful for at least understanding. I don't think this is what is really happening.
Sure.
But when I get quiet, I actually feel that awareness that's underneath all of the impulse, underneath all of the instinct. And when really establishing a very clear connection to that, it's to me, to what I really am underneath all of this, what everybody really is underneath all of this.
Yes.
That connection is so informative and is so relieving and is so, I say relieving because to the experience that I was describing, it might not seem like a relief to look directly at what being a lonely failure actually is. But it's kind of like running away from the monster in a bad dream.
Yeah.
The anticipation is what's scary. You turn around and you face that thing and poof, it turns into flowers.
Yeah.
And there's always this anticipation, at least for me, that I was holding around actually approaching my emotions. And you said it's courageous, but it doesn't feel courageous. It's just like, instead of running away or trying to tell a different story that might be more socially appropriate than or socially accepted than the one that's really going on, by really turning to that and trying to feel as deeply as possible, but from this place of, I'm just the awareness that's aware of this. What can my awareness fully feel right now? I mean, it seems so obvious and so simple. And it kind of is a little embarrassing that it's like, oh shit, it took me 6 years to do that. Actually, it took me like 30 years to do that. But it's
understand
magic.
Something. That is courage, because you don't want to face that. Here's the funny thing. By you, what do you mean? We get right back to identity. You just stepped down below. You opened up that hidden trap door and you went one step lower. And you're standing underneath the ego right now, looking at the ego, and it's flopping around trying to rejigger the conversation we're making right now. And because we keep breathing and getting quiet, you're not prettying it up. Your ego's scrambling right now. Can you feel it? It's kind of flopping around up there. You're not it. You can watch it. It wants to make this a much more socially accepted thing. It doesn't like that label, lonely failure. Lonely failure. You were willing to have that discomfort, and then you realize that thing just vaporizes because it's not real. It's not who you really are. You're coming home. And you've heard me say that 10,000 times. Now you get it. Now please don't get snookered by that ego. It's relentless. It is going to want to now somehow get around what we just did and say, aren't I all that? Look at me. Breathe and get still. Don't even think about it. And from this point forward, if you would, please, breathe and get still 100 times more than you've ever done it before. Because right now, that ego's up against the ropes. And it's going to do everything it can to pull you back to not knowing what you know about who you really are. We're not beating the ego up. The ego is now forced to expand. Your sense of self is expanding right now. That is practical spirituality at work. Now, come back to the practice. Keep doing the practice. That's all. There's nothing more to say. It's beautiful. Now, for those who are confused and think there's some kind of technical glitch, what's going on right now?
You said there's nothing more to say.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I wholeheartedly agree with both of those statements.
Can you hear the difference in your pitch of voice?
Absolutely.
This is Henry. This is Henry. Hi, this is the guy I've seen from the moment you walked into my office. This is Henry. Hi. Please don't go away. If you have to, okay. But please don't.
Just going to keep chipping away at everything that's not me, I guess.
Yeah. Aren't we all?
Well, thank you, Jim. This was a really lovely conversation.
I loved it. This was one of my favorites. I loved this.
I'm excited for our next topic.
Yeah, that's going to be a doozy.
I think the world will be a far better place hearing your take on love, and I'm excited for that to happen.
Well, I would suggest that if you want to know what my take on love is, very quickly, don't allow too much time to elapse. Just go in and look in the mirror. Okay?
Yes,
All
sir.
right. And thank you once again for being willing to sit through this. I hope you got something out of it so that we don't have to wrestle with the concept of failure anymore. Thank you.